Moriden Athluan.
The champion of Kinneret. Moriden showed the beauty of nature by finding renewal for the great and glorious Gildergreen of Whiterun, providing a place of worship for all manner of men and mer.
The champion of Daibella, the only man to enter the most sacred places of the temple in Markat and live. He, who found out the Daibellian symbol and returned her to the temple, so that all could hear the will of the great goddess.
The messenger of Mara, whose small words and influence sparked two of the greatest love stories of all time in Skyrim.
Moriden was at the height of his goodly deeds when word reached him of a new threat to Skyrim and its people.
Like the mighty champion of the people he had become, he looked up to the role of the people's champion once again and set off to destroy the vampire threat.
Come closer and hear the story of how he destroyed one of the oldest threats to
Still
man
searching
and
for stories about me, I see. I hate to disappoint you, but this portion of my story, you won't find a single bard who knows what he's talking about. That's fine now. We have time, my friend. I can tell it far better than they can, as they tell it for entertainment, not because it is truth. Because the truth is not what the bards would have you believe. "21 Sons Dusk, 4th Era, 201. We emerged shortly later into a courtyard, her mother's retreat. It featured, among other things, a large sundial-like structure at the center, and the largest collection of organized dead plants I've ever seen. Valerica must have been quite the gardener when she was still here to take care of it, but with her gone and the entire area sealed off from the main castle, mostly, the whole collection has fallen to almost dust. Serana's attention was on the moon dial, for that was what the emblems were there. Phases of the moon. Not sure how it would work to tell time, but I noticed how intently she was looking at it. "I'm almost certain," she said slowly, "that there weren't any pieces missing last time I was here." With my attention drawn to it, I saw it as well. Several crests were missing from the outer ring. Disrepair? Or something deliberate? When I poked around the remains of this garden, I found 3 crests, but noticed that there were 4 slots. I tore that place apart trying to find a 4th crest, certain that all of them would be needed to, well, do whatever it was that the moon dial was supposed to do. In frustration, and as a way to empty my hands, I finally just placed the 3 I had, and then turned to go searching again. I heard a grinding noise behind me. I didn't turn around, just allowed my shoulders to slump in defeat. The 3 were all that were missing. I knew. When I did turn, I found that the area around the dial had dropped into a stairway, not unlike the structures that led to Blackreach. Serana was staring at me, trying very, very hard not to giggle at me. She more or less succeeded. As to the new tunnel, she had never seen it or been in it before. This, then, would be new territory for her as well. So much for the personal tour guide. I readied my bow and started down the steps. Or rather, that's what I tried to do. Oblivion save me from women trying to flirt with me when we're on a dangerous infiltration mission. Okay, yes, she's been cooped up in a coffin for the better part of several thousand years, but me? Seriously? And given that her father was a king back then, I doubt she had the time or ability to try out her feminine wiles on anyone before. So not only was Serana flirting with me, she was doing it in the most painful way possible. This was complicated enough. But couldn't she have waited until this whole thing was over before trying this? The area of the castle we entered was quite neglected. The inhabited portions of the castle are obviously old, but they had at least been somewhat cared for. This area is what the castle would have looked like if it had not been. Serana claims she'd never been in this portion of the castle, so if this is where Valerica went into hiding, every skeleton and gargoyle we've been encountering was left here to defend her retreat. But if she was here, then why the neglect? Surely there would be some indication of life here. Some areas showing some level of organization or care were missing something, I think. But until we can clear the area of the creatures left to protect it, I doubt we'll be able to figure it out. This wing of the castle is easily larger than the section Lord Harkin and the others are set up in. I find it hard to believe that he would deliberately cut himself off from so large a section of his own home. On the other hand, maybe it wasn't him. Perhaps Valerica set it up somehow, or made him think it was his own idea. Honestly, I have no idea. But the fact remains that if he were to open this up again, there would be room for so many more of the clan. I wonder now if, perhaps, that might even be the reason right there. Keep the livable area small, keep the clan small, keep the threats to his power small. It would make some level of sense. Or maybe he just doesn't want to deal with things like hauling old statues to Mara out of the castle. We ascended the final tower, hidden only slightly cleverly behind a false fireplace triggered by a candlestick, and entered what I can only term to be Valerica's workshop. A large, open space, books and various items of unknown importance or design, and in the center, a small series of concentric circles that indented into the floor. A quick look at Serana made it clear she had no idea what it was for either, at least not specifically. She knew what it related to, after all. Valerica had taught Serana everything she knew about necromancy. I let that pass. I'm not a fan of the practice, nor is most of Tamriel, but now wasn't the time to start some kind of crusade about it. Serana also pointed out the obvious. Valerica wasn't here, or rather, she wasn't here any longer. The materials here were, compared to the rest of the wing we had just left, relatively fresh, meaning she had been here for some time, or someone had been. If it was Valerica, and I can't imagine it was anyone else, then she had to go somewhere. Serana said that her mother was always fanatical about taking notes on her endeavors, so there might be a notebook or journal here that could point the way. When we found her notes, we were on the border of elation that we had found something, and incredulity at what they told us. The Soul Cairn. Valerica found a way to physically travel into the Soul Cairn. For those not steeped in the lore of enchantment, take heed. The soul cairn is the true source of every enchantment you have ever used. The souls trapped in the soul gem are not used up, they are traded to the ideal masters, the lord of the soul cairn, in exchange for the enchantment placed on the weapon or item or whatnot. Your bargain with them, the one you didn't even know you were making, only lasts so long before it needs to be recharged. Or, thought of another way, before you need to pay an additional soul for additional time. Valerica was ahead of her time. She had theorized about this back in her era. Today, those who have read and studied accept this as a proven fact, and have for quite a few centuries. Nobody, however, has ever found a way to actually enter the cairn physically. Or so we thought. Using the recipe Valerica left behind, and substituting Serana's blood for Valerica's, we have opened the same portal that Valerica did way back when. No wonder Lord Harkin never found his estranged wife. She wasn't even on Mundus to be found, and it was this portal that she had been waiting for before she locked Serana away. After we opened the portal and stared at it, in wonder appropriately, we started down the steps and into a whole new dimension. Serana claims that the soul cairn is a realm of oblivion, and perhaps this is so. All I can say for certain is that the internal twilight feel to this place is off-putting, and that I am unsure if my sense of smell will ever recover from the first few moments after we entered. The reek is indescribable. It also is something we could do nothing about, so I tried my best to ignore it and figure out how we are going to find Valerica in this realm. The steps provided enough elevation to get an idea of the region around us. A path or two meandered through the... well, let's not call it a countryside, but the word will have to do. I could see several buildings or other structures that might be places she would set up, and nothing to tell between them. Normally, I'd think to stay to the road, but if I were Valerica, would I have done that? I think not. So our search will have to be a meticulous one, searching everything we can as we move through this place. Several structures later, and there was no sign of Valerica. There were spirits everywhere, all of whom seemed to be confused as to where they were. Many of them didn't even realize that they were dead. But since we couldn't break through what they saw as reality to speak with them in anything resembling a normal conversation, we couldn't inform them of such either. They were all less than helpful as a result. Well, not all. One of them was coherent enough to indicate that his horse was running around somewhere in the cairn and asked us to help find it. I almost dismissed this spirit as similar to the others, but then it said something to make it clear that it was aware of where it was, and that the horse didn't need to be trapped here like this. Find the skull, and I may have a horse that cannot die. That indeed would be worth it. We crossed through a giant wall that seemed to divide the place in half. On the one half we had already searched all the structures we could find, and though I now have a sizable collection of soul gems and souls to fill them, there was still no evidence that Valerica had been at any of them. The other side of the wall seemed larger, more expansive, and it was only now that I remembered that I had another task here, one I'd never thought to actually be able to do. Belethor's sister was here somewhere. So if I managed to find the entity that the warlocks had traded her to, then perhaps I could finally get the woman home. I wasn't long on the other side of the wall before I ran into a bit of luck. The soul walking around didn't surprise me. The other one, who was still clearly alive, was. A quick question and I learned that I had finally located Belethor's sister, Lali. She was, understandably, grumpy, and had little idea where she was. I spoke with the soul, which it turns out is the one who had made the deal with the warlocks. He was willing to release her, though I'd have to escort her back to Whiterun. And isn't that going to be entertaining, when I'm on a plane of oblivion looking for an ancient vampire and an Elder Scroll? 22 Sons Dusk, 4th Era, 201. I'm not entirely sure how long we've been poking around in the Cairn. We've not accomplished much, it feels like, though I have encountered another soul who retains his sense of self, enough so that he realized that he was dead after we talked for a few moments. When he was alive, he was a Dunmer, and he claims to have been called, among other names, Saint Jub. I'm not entirely sure I've ever heard of him before, but he blames that on not being able to finish publishing his 26-volume opus about his accomplishments. He did publish one, he claims. He was working on the second when a Dremora killed him and trapped his soul. The pages are here, he's certain. 10 pages of notes. I had been finding random papers at the other sites I'd visited, but not all of the ones he's looking for. I said I'd keep an eye out for them, maybe carry the book out of the Cairn when we left. It would be nice to have a Dunmer hailed as a saint for once. Some hours later, I also located the horse skull of Arvak. The spirit who had sent me looking appeared not far away, and, through means I do not pretend to understand, taught me how to summon him in the real world. Which means I have a horse. An undead horse. A flaming undead horse. Imagine someone trying to steal that horse. Imagine all the accusations of necromancy I'll have to endure. Imagine all the money I'll save not having to buy a horse every few weeks. Though there is still nothing to indicate Valerica is here, there had also been nothing to indicate that dragons would be a problem either, until now. A word wall. Or at least it used to be one, and if there is a wall, then there is a good chance then there might be dragons as well. I can't imagine anything living staying here for any real kind of time, but given the apparent age of the wall, they must have at one point. There aren't many places left to search. Indeed, it is mostly just the large fortress-like structure that we have been avoiding. We were wrong in our assumptions that the ideal masters were likely there and had to be avoided. We have since learned that the giant floating crystals over many of the structures are the masters, and every time we got close enough, they would take some of Lali's life energy. Serana and myself had nothing to worry about on that front, but now that we have learned what the masters are, why is there a massive fortress then? We had barely gotten to the gates when Valerica came around the corner and froze. She couldn't believe what she was seeing, I'm sure, but I still find it disturbing that the first thing she asked was where Serana's father was. Then again, if Serana had gotten here, why not the man she was hiding from? Though Serana tried to get in words edgewise, in the classic tradition of mothers and daughters everywhere, she was mostly talked straight over. Until she noticed me. Then Valerica's mood got really dark. After demanding a few explanations from me, I finally got a few. Valerica had already pieced together something that Lord Harkon might not have known, but would have figured out eventually. The Elder Scrolls are not the key to this prophecy that he's chasing. Serana is. Serana was being hidden as much as the scroll was, perhaps more, and I had delivered the key straight to Harkon. Serana's death would be the thing that allowed the tyranny of the sun prophecy to be fulfilled. I do not much care for the way that Serana looks at me, but nor would I see her killed for this prophecy. Which is how, combined with a number of other factors I've spoken of in the last week or two, I found myself stating my intent to try and kill Lord Harkon, rather than let him kill Serana. Not that Valerica believes I have even the most remote chance of pulling that off. She'd have done that herself if she thought it was even possible. More ranting and railing between mother and daughter followed, but they managed to reach an accord of some kind. Serana finally spoke her mind, accusing her mother of treating her like a pawn as much as Harkin had done. That stopped Valerica cold, as it was a reflection of the accusation that she had made about me, that I was only using her. Things got a bit more cordial at that point, and though Valerica still isn't sure of my final intentions, which is fair as I'm not even sure, it seems, she was willing to follow Serana's lead. It seems that this keep had once had an energy barrier around it, until we had eliminated what she called keepers, likely some of the nastier creatures we'd been dealing with while roaming through the cairn. However, there is still one more twist. There is a dragon here after all, Durnavir, who has been charged by the Ideal Masters to keep an eye on the keepers, and with the barrier down, it is certain he will investigate. I readied my weapons and prepared for his almost certain arrival, and then we all entered the keep to retrieve the Elder Scroll. We had barely entered the doors when her words and my fear were both proven correct. The dragon Durnavir crested the walls and began his attack. I'm not sure which category the dragon belongs in, one of the shades that haunts this place, or a true dragon, like I am used to fighting, but in the absence of surety, I went with what I knew, and hit it with Dragonrend almost immediately. Like Alduin, it had no idea what had hit it, no idea of how to cope with it. Though it tried to bring in more of the shades and creatures we'd been fighting off the entire time we'd been in the cairn, those were not enough to stop me from carving into the dragon's hide. The creature didn't die, though. It simply tore itself to pieces in a violet pulsing light and vanished. No soul. No knowledge. So, an undead image, which I didn't think a dragon could do, honestly. With the beast dealt with, though, Valerica once again took the lead, with Serana and myself following closely behind. Valerica made her mind plain. She would be remaining here in the cairn until she knows that Harkin is gone. She, like her daughter, is a daughter of Cold Harbor, a rite of Molag Bal that she shuddered to even talk about, let alone remember. I think I am just as glad that she did not give details. Regardless, Serana will be returning with me to Tamriel, and I have been charged, in the strongest of terms, to keep Serana alive and safe. I was also warned that the dragon may not actually be dead, which would explain why I didn't receive anything from it when it died. It may just be off putting its body back together again, so I need to be keeping an eye on what passes for the sky in this place. I will be happy to leave. The cairn is clearly not meant for the living, or even for vampires. Valerica was not wrong. I watched Durnavir pull himself together as I left the keep. Surprisingly, though, it did not attack, and instead called to me to speak with him. Since the dragon had me pinned between himself and the keep wall, I decided that discretion was an important part of battle as well, and lowered my bow. The dragon is, as many are, I am learning, a victim here as well. His time in the cairn actually began after Valerica's, and his story gave me a better idea of when Serana was placed in Dim Hollow, a time just after the Dragon Wars, but before the Blades had begun their crusade against the Dover. Seeking to maintain its own superiority, it sought to learn the magics of necromancy, and the Ideal Masters made it a promise it could not ignore. All he had to do for his powers was to stay here until Valerica left. Durnavir thought it a trivial thing. Mortals die all the time, after all. But he was never told that she was immortal. Thus, through his bargain and his extended time here, he cannot leave. But he has given me 2 things. First, a name. Kanarin. In the dragon's tongue, a title that translates roughly as Vanquisher, and given to those among the Dova who have defeated another Dova in combat. Though I am Mer, my spirit is at least partially Dova, hence my dragon blood and title of Dovahkiin, Dragonborn. That, in its estimation, is good enough. Second, I have been granted the ability to call upon Durnavir as an ally in battle, allowing him to return to the skies of Tamriel, if only briefly. He considers this a fair trade. And who am I to argue? Durnavir. Cursed, never dying. It was immortal before, but that immortality is indeed now a curse, as it cannot leave this place. For an ally, though, I can certainly find the time to bring it back to the skies.